You've put all this time and effort creating a beautiful woven wall hanging, and the back looks probably something like this. In today's video, I'm gonna show you how to tuck in merino wool roving, cotton rope, and a few different sizes of yarn so you can have a really nice finished back. The only tools you're going to need to do this is a pair of scissors and a yarn needle. This yarn needle is just a plastic one. I really like these for tucking in ends. They're kind of short, they've got a big eye. You can pick them up pretty much anywhere that yarn is sold. We're gonna start by tucking in the wool roving. I find that it's so big and fluffy and chaotic that tucking that in first makes the whole piece already feel better. I'm just going to use my hands for the wool roving. You can use a needle as well if you like. Here you can see I have 2 warp strings. I'm going to grab this wool roving, tuck it in behind, and pull it through. I'm not reaming on it. I don't want it to affect the way the front of the piece looks. I'm gonna go into a few more over here. And I find usually just a couple is plenty. And then I'm gonna use my scissors and just trim that off. It's not gonna be super short, but you can see that that already looks so much tidier. I'm going to do the same thing with this piece, grabbing a few warp strings, tucking it under, and trimming off the excess. Now we can move on to the next color. One thing that I found most surprising when I've been at craft sales selling woven wall hangings is that people always look at the back. Like, they literally pick up the piece, look at the front, and then they flip it around and look at the back. Even really big pieces that they just have to sort of like peek behind, they always want to look at the back. And I found that so surprising because you would think it would just be like, oh, there's this pretty weaving, I'm just gonna look at it and admire it. But no, they're gonna look at the back, which is why it's important to tuck in all these ends, especially if you're hoping to sell your pieces. And I'm not saying that you need to, post photos online of the backs of your weaving, but I do think that there's quite a nice treat for your customer when they open up your weaving and the back is finished nicely. It's kind of like any product that you might pick up off of a shelf. You're probably not just going to look at the front of it. You might be looking at the back to see the ingredients, or if it's a book, the synopsis of the book, and you're basically looking for more information. And in the case of weaving, the information you're looking for is, is the quality there? Is this piece worth the price? And, as my art school teachers used to always say, the back is just as important as the front. And it's not like we're trying to make this perfect. We're about precise, not perfect over here. I do think that there is just this implication of quality when even the back of your beautiful woven wall hanging, looks good. I have a really long tail on this one. We can just pull off some of it just because it's gonna be a lot harder to tuck in otherwise. And other than that, we're just tucking all these ends into more of those warp strings. Here we have some plied yarn. I'm just going to use my yarn needle now to tuck this in. I have 2 strands of it because I wove with 2 strands at a time. And I'm just going to tuck this into some of the channels of the weft. So the weft is the strings going, if I was holding this the correct way, would be horizontal. I'm tucking them in like so. So from the back, picking up those 2 loops, 2 more, and 2 more. So I'm going into 3 different rows of that weft, pulling this through. See how I don't want to pull super tight? We're getting some gaps in there now. So I'm just going to kind of pull that back a little bit and then trim off the ends. And you can see I'm not trimming off these ends super, super short. We don't want to risk any of them being too short that they're slipping out on us. In this section, we don't have a lot of our plain weave. So in this case, I'm gonna go back through a couple warp strings first. And then I'm going to go down some weft channels. Trim off those ends. And the same process with the rest of this yellow yarn. Now I have some rope ends, and this was all knotting. So they're all just individual knots tied into the warp, and we're gonna tuck this end in. So threading it onto my needle. This time I am just going to go through some warp strings, similar to what we did with the sumac stitch. So I'm just picking a couple here, pulling that through, making sure it's not too tight anywhere, trimming off the excess with that little bit of a tail so it doesn't come untucked. Here at the top of my piece, I have some more of the cotton rope. This time it's different thicknesses, and it's also in plain weave and twining instead of that knotting. This time around, since I really only have a couple of rows, I'm gonna go back into the warp strings. There's just not enough weft strings for me to go through, and I don't wanna go pulling on these blue yarns here, because if we remember, those are rya loops, and if we pull them the wrong way, they're gonna wanna start coming undone. I'm just gonna push that back down. You can see that that's kind of showing from the front. I'm pulling it so it's sitting on top of the yarn instead of beside it, and then trim off the excess. Now this tail is quite short. I am gonna go through the weft strings on this one. There's not really any good warp strings for me to go through. I'm going to tuck it down through this weft string first. And now this tail was really short, so I've put my needle through where I want it to go first, and then I'm threading the needle. Otherwise, it's just gonna come undone anyway. So I can pull that through there. And now we're gonna look for somewhere else to tuck it. I can see that I can get away with tucking it under this warp string, and that should be enough. So once again, I've put my needle through that warp string, then I'm threading it and pulling it through. On this side with my cotton rope, again, I don't want this to show in the front. I'm gonna tuck it where I've tucked in the merino roving. I'm always looking for a combination of the easiest place to tuck it in and the place to tuck it in where it will show the least in the front. Those are two things that are important because we don't want these ends affecting the finished piece at all. We want them to really hide and just look tidy. So I'm literally just putting these two in the exact same spot. And what we can do is sort of hide the very ends in amongst the wool roving there. Now for this boucle yarn. So it's sort of like this stitched yarn. It's really textured, but I did just weave plain weave with it. So I know that I'll be able to go through the channels. The channels of the weft are just like a little hard to see. So I'm just going to kind of poke around. So I found one here. Should be one right above it. That looks about right. Is it right? Because it's really hard to pull through. There we go. So that one's gonna be even more hidden than some of the other ones just because of the texture of the yarn. And then same principle on this end. For me, when I'm weaving, I leave, as you can see with this piece, I've left all the ends to tuck in when I'm finished weaving. The reason I do this is because it's simply because I changed my mind. And if I were to tuck in all the ends neatly as I went, I would feel so much more resistance to unweaving parts that don't feel right. So that's why I leave them for when I'm finished weaving. It's just a simple matter of that it's easy. I can just unweave it. I can put something else in if it doesn't feel done. If I've already finished it, it feels like just mentally, it's like this resistance of like, I'm not taking that out. It's already done. So that's part of why. Now we're on to a rya loop section. I can see one of my loops sticking out into the back. So I'm tucking that back into the front. I'm gonna take this yarn. We don't wanna go in these channels. We don't wanna pull out those loops. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tuck them in just the warp strings. So we can just kind of scooch some of those loops apart from each other and then just find some warp strings to tuck them in. And now that looks nice and tidy. It hides in there pretty well. I'm not gonna lie to you. This is the part of weaving I enjoy the least. And I am pretty sure that, you know, the majority of weavers feel this way, but I don't know. It's kind of one of those things that like you don't want to work so hard on making the front so beautiful and then have the back look like a hot mess. And look at this already. This is looking really nice on the back. And I mean, say what you will about it being annoying to tuck in those ends. It's still really satisfying when you do it and it looks nice at the end. These dark gold yarns are another section of Rya loops. So I'm tucking them in the same way that I tucked in the blue yarns. We're in another knotting section now. Same thing goes with these. I'm tucking them into the warp strings. Here at the bottom, below my fringe, I have some just plain weave and this off-white yarn. I'm tucking it in the same way I tucked in the other plain weave section. So just through a couple of these channels. Then I'm gonna go back up because I just don't wanna have the end at the very bottom. So I'm just tucking it in like that. After tucking in the ends, the front, probably gonna need some floofing, if you will. So I'm just going to floof these yarn ends, some of the wool, just make sure it doesn't look squished. Seriously though, you guys, tell me that isn't satisfying. It may not be the sexiest part about weaving, but it certainly is a big part about weaving, so we might as well do it in a way that feels satisfying when we're done. If you want to learn some of the stitches that you saw on the front of this piece, we have sumac, Rya loops, and knotting. Check out our stitch library playlist where we have tons of weaving, stitch, and technique videos waiting for you, and we'll see you inside the stitch library.